I think a big mistake of like research specifically in the area of like computational creativity is this idea you can automate it entirely. So you see like one click off solutions to do X, Y, or Z. And I think that's missed the bigger picture of like how most of creative work should actually work. Or that probably means that you've never actually worked with an agency or the client who's asking you to like change things every single hour, or make it bigger, make it smaller, right?
You're listening to Gradient Descent, a show about machine learning in the real world, and I'm your host, Lucas Bewald.
Chris Valenzuela is an artist and technologist and entrepreneur and CEO and founder of a company called Runway, which is a maker of ML-powered video editing software. But I feel like that description doesn't even do justice to how incredible and innovative his product is. This interview actually starts off with a live demo of his product, and I really recommend switching to video if you're listening to this on audio only, because his demo is absolutely incredible. Well, all right, Chris, we don't normally do this, but I thought it would be fun to start with a product demo if you're down for it. You have such a cool, compelling product. Would you be up for that?
Sure. What do you want me to demo? There's a lot I can demo. I want to make sure I can focus on what do you want to see.
Well, this is an ML podcast, so I think people would probably be interested in like the most flashy ML features. How about that?
Okay. So in short, Runway is a full video creation suite. It allows you to do things that you might be able to do in more traditional video editing software. The main difference is that everything that runs behind the scenes, so most of the core components of Runway are ML driven. And the reason for that, it has two main kind of like modes or uniqueness about making everything ML based. One is it helps editors and content creators and video makers automate and simplify really time-consuming and expensive processes when making video or content. There are a lot of stuff that you're doing in traditional software that are very repetitive in nature, that are very time-consuming and expensive. So Runway aims basically to simplify and reduce the time of doing those stuff, right? It's if you have a video you want to edit or an idea you want to execute, spending the time and the minutes and the hours and sometimes days on like this very boring stuff is not the thing that you really want to do. And so we build algorithms and systems that help you just do that in a very easy way. And then there's another aspect of Runway that it's not only about automation, but it's about generation. And so we build models and algorithms and systems that allow our users and customers to create content on demand. And everything, I guess, a baseline for us is that everything happens on the browser. And so it's web-based and cloud native, which means that you don't rely anymore on native computers or native applications or desktop compute. You have access to our GPU cluster on demand, and you can render videos on 4K, 6K, pretty much in real time. Plus, you can do all of this AI stuff also in real time as well. And so a lot of the folks who are using Runway now, like CBS, like the Late Night Show with Colbert, or the folks who edit Top Gear, or sometimes like creators who do stuff for Alicia Keys or for just TikTok or movies, they're all leveraging this AI kind of like things behind the scene via this web-based, cloud-based editor. So I'd say, I guess, in a short, 5-minute intro, what the product does and how ML or AI plays a role in the product itself. But I'm happy to kind of like now show you how everything kind of like goes together and like the experience of using it, if that makes sense.
Please, yeah.
Cool. Any questions or anything, I guess, before we do that you want to, I can double down, or if you wanted me to help clarify.
Well, I actually didn't realize that that professional video teams like Colbert uses Runway. Do they use it for all of their like video processing, or is there like a certain part where they use it? How does that work?
It depends. Some editors and some folks are using it like as an end-to-end tool to create videos. Some other folks use a combination of different softwares to make something, right? And so the folks who use it for movies, sometimes add it in like Nuke or Flame. We have a big Flame community, and so Runway becomes a part of that workflow. It's replacing either something you're doing on a very manual basis, It's sometimes replacing a contractor you hired to make that work for you, or it's sometimes replacing your own work of trying to do it yourself in this like old software. But you still use other aspects of it or other software to combine it. It really depends on the type of content that you have and the level of like outcomes that you need. But we do have folks that use it as an end-to-end content creation and editing tool.
Cool. Well, I mean, the extent of my video editing is basically like modifying videos of my daughter to like take out the boring parts and send them to my parents. So that's like as far as I go. Maybe you could sort of give me like a little bit of an overview of the cool stuff you can do with Runway.
Totally, you can do all of that in Runway and
Awesome.
in the browser, which is you might start using Runway for that. And yeah, the one thing I would I guess emphasize is like everything is running on the cloud, on the web. So you can just open any project with a URL. You can also create teams, and you have all this like baseline collaboration aspect that just like runs out of the box. Cool. Anything else? No, just go demo.
Yeah,
stuff?
let's see a demo. Totally. Yeah, so really cool stuff.
Perfect. So this is what Runway looks like. It's, if you ever edited video before, it's a very kind of like common interface. We have like tracks on the bottom. You have a multi editing system with audio tracks and keyframe animations and text layers and image support. You can preview your assets on the main window and have a bunch of effects and filters on the right. Again, everything running pretty much on the cloud in real time. And the idea here is that there are a lot of things that you can do that are very similar to stuff that you can do in other applications, plus there are things that you can do anywhere else, right? So let me give you an example of something that a lot of folks are using Runway for. I'm going to start with a fresh composition here. I'm going to click one of the demo assets that I have here. I'm going to click this. So I have a surfer, right, on that shot. Let's say I want to apply some sort of effect or transformation to the background of this shot, or I want to maybe replace the person here and take it somewhere else. The way we do that today would be a combination of like frame by frame editing, where you're basically segmenting and creating an outline of your subject, and every single frame you move, you have to do it one more time. And so for that, we built our video object segmentation model, which we actually publish a blog post and a paper around it that allows you to do real-time video segmentation. In film, this is actually called rotoscoping, and you can just literally go here, guide the model with some sort of input reference. So I tell the model, like, this is what I want to rotoscope, and I can go as deep as I need. I can select the whole surf layer here, add deeper, more control over it. And then once the model has a good understanding of what you want to do, it will propagate that single kind of like keyframe or a single layer to all the frames of video right in real time. And so you get a pretty smooth, consistent segmentation mask that you can either export as a single layer or export as a PNG layer, or you can use back in your, go back to your editing kind of like timeline and start modifying, right? So you said like you want to cut it, you want to compose it, you want to do some sort of like transformation. From here, you can do that directly from here. So let's say I have my baseline or my base video here, I have my mask or on top of that, and now I can just like literally like move it around like this. Right, I have two layers, right, of the surfer. So something that looks very simple and like traditional software might take you like a couple of hours of work. Here you can do pretty much on real time. And again, it's something that most editors know how to do, but just takes them a lot of time to actually do.
And did you just run that in the browser?
Yeah,
that segmentation mask, it figured it out in the browser, and it's calculating all. It doesn't go to the server.
No, it goes to the server. Yeah, there's an inference pipeline that we build that processes like real time videos and allows you to do these things. The compute part is everything running on the cloud. You just see like the previews, and sometimes depending on your connection, you can see a downsample version of it, so it runs really smoothly and plays really, really nicely. Yeah. Also, for every single video, there's a few layers that we run that help either guide something like a segmentation mask. For instance, we get depth maps, and we estimate depth maps for every single video layer. You can also export this depth maps as independent layers and use them for specific workflows. So that's also something very useful for folks to leverage. So you get this, right, and you can export this. Behind the scenes, we're using this for a bunch of things.
Cool.
So yeah, those are like one of the things that you can do. You can go very complex and stuff. Let's say instead of the surfer, I just want like let me refresh this. I just want the background. I don't want the surfer there. I can like in paint or remove that surfer from the shot. So I'm just gonna like paint over it. And again, I'm giving the model like one single keyframe layer. And the model is able to propagate those consistently for the entirety of the video. And that's also something I guess, as a product philosophy, we really want to think about, which is like you need to have some layer of control, right, of like input. And the hard part of that should just be handled by the model itself. But there's always some level of like human in the loop process where you're guiding the model, you're telling it like, hey, this is what I want to remove. Just go ahead and do the hard work, actually doing that for the whole video sequence.
Wow, that's really amazing. That's like magic right there.
Yeah, that's actually
really
something
just gone.
That's something we see a lot when people find out about Runway and start using it. Magic is a word we hear a lot. It's something that, again, if you're editing or working film or content before, you know how hard and time consuming and just painful it is. And just seeing it work so instantaneously, like really, really triggers that idea over for like in Magic or in everyone's kind of like minds, which is something that's great because we've really thought of the project as something very magical to use. So there's stuff like that. Then there are a few things like green screen and in-painting, which I'm showing you now, plus motion tracking that you can consider like baseline models in a Runway. And so those are just, you can use them as unique tools, as I'm showing you right now. You can also combine them to create all sort of like interesting workflows and dynamics. And so there's the idea of like, I don't know, you want to transform or generate this video and take this surfer into another location. You can actually generate the background and have the camera track the position of the object in real time, and then apply the background that you just generated in a consistent manner, so everything looks really smooth. And the way you do that is by combining kind of like all of these models in real time behind the scenes. And so you might have seen like some of those demos in Twitter, which we've been kind of like announcing and releasing. So this is a demo of like running a few of those underlying models combined, right? So there's a segmentation model that's
Wow.
rotoscoping the tennis player in real time. There's a motion tracking model that's tracking the camera movement, and then there's an image generation model behind the scenes that is generating the video, the image in real time, right? And those are all composed at the same time. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, those are, I would say, are like underlying baseline models, and then you can combine them in all sort of like interesting and different ways.
All right. Well, thanks for that demo is so cool. We'll switch to the interview format. Although I now I really want to like modify this video in all kinds of crazy ways.
Yeah, we should replace the background some stuff while we're talking.
Totally. Get this microphone out.
Yeah.
I guess one question I really wanted to ask you is I think your background's actually not in machine learning originally, right? And I always think it's really interesting how people enter the machine learning space. So I'd just love to hear your story a little bit of how you ended up running this super cool machine learning company. And it seems like you're very technically deep also in sort of how you managed to kind of get that depth mid-career.
Totally. So I guess long story short, I'm originally from Chile, and I studied like econ in Chile, and I was working on like something completely unrelated. But it was like 2016 and 2017, I think, and I just randomly fall into like a rabbit hole of like ML and AI generated like art. It was like very early days of like Deep Dream and like CubNets and AlexNet, where like people were trying to make sense of how to use this new stuff in the context of art making. There were some people like Mike Taika and Mario Klingemann and like Jim Kogan who were just like posting these very mind-blowing demos that now feel like things that you can run on your iPhone in like real time. But around that time, it was like I remember like Carl McDonald, which is an artist, who was like walking around with his laptop just showing people like a live stream of a camera, and you have basically like a I think it was like an ImageNet model running on real time and just describing what it saw. And it just blew my mind. It's like, again, it's like 2016. Now it's like pretty like obvious, but around that time it was like pretty, I don't know, special. And it just went into a rabbit hole of that for like too long, and it was too much. I was just like fascinated by it. So actually decided to like quit my job. I decided to like leave everything I had. I got a scholarship to study at NYU and just spent like 2 years just really going very deep into this, specifically in the context of, I would say, kind of like creativity. Like I guess my area of like interest was the idea of like computational creativity. How do you use technology, and how do you use like deep learning or ML for really creative kind of like tool making and art making. And that 2-year long research process and kind of like exploration ended up with Runway. That Runway was my thesis at school. It was a very different version of what you see now. But the main idea was pretty much the same. It's like, hey, there's ML and AI are basically a new compute platform. They offer new ways of either manipulating or creating content. And so there needs to be some sort of like new tool making suite that leverages all of this and allows people to tap into those kind of like systems in a very accessible and easy way. And so the first version of Runway was a layer of abstraction on top of like Docker, where you could run different algorithms and different models in real time on this like Electron app. And so you can click and run models in real time and connect those models via either sockets or UDP or a web server to like Unity or Photoshop. And so we started building all these like plugins where you can do the stuff that you are able to see now on Twitter, or like, here, I build a Photoshop or a Figma plugin that does image generation. We're building all that stuff, running like Docker models in your computer locally, and you can like stream those. And it was like 2018, 2019.
Interesting. So it must have been a much more technical audience at the time then, right? If you have to run Docker on your local machine, that's not something everyone can do, right?
Totally. I think that also tells a lot about how much progress the field has made and how mainstream and how more accessible things have become. Like, again, trying to put this set of like new platforms and compute ideas for creators and video makers and filmmakers require you to know how to install CUDA and like manage cuDNN. I don't know, it's just too much. But people were still wanting to do it. There were some aspects, some folks were like, hey, this is like really unique. I want to understand how to use this. But then we realized it wasn't like enough. You need to go higher layers of abstraction on top of that to really enable like creative folks to play with this without having to spend like months trying to set up like their GPU machines, right? And so Runway has really evolved, and we have a really like experiment-driven kind of like thesis and way of working on the product. That it's all about like trying ideas and testing them out with people really fast. We're building something that hasn't been done before, and so it's really easy to get sidetracked into things that you think are going to work or ideas that you think are going to be impactful. But since you're working with new stuff all the time, being close to your user base for us has been kind of really, really important. And so every time we've iterated on the product, I think one consistent line of evolution has been this idea of like simplifying, making higher abstraction layers on top of it. Like the first version of rotoscoping or ink painting required you to select the underlying like model architecture, and they're applying and understanding what a mask was and propagation works. Like if you're really a filmmaker, like you don't care about any of those stuff. You just want to click once and you want to get a really good result. So for us, it's like, how do you build from there using what we're building behind the scenes.
Were you surprised how well these approaches have worked to generate images? Like, it sounds like you started your work in like 2017, 2018. The space the space that you're in has changed so much. Do you feel like you saw it coming, or have things unfolded differently than you thought?
Yeah, I mean, things have definitely accelerated, but I think our thesis, like when we started Runway 3.5 years ago, was pretty much the same. It was like we're entering like literally like a new paradigm of computation and content, and we're soon gonna be able to generate like every single piece of content and multimedia content that we see online. I've been demoing like generating models for creative use cases for the last 3 years, and what I was showing like 3 years ago, people were like, it was like, hey, this is how it works. This is how you train a model, and this is what the outcome of the model is. And of course, at that time, like it was like blurry, I don't know, 500 by 500 pixels like image. It's some sort of like a representation of what you're describing. Most people took it as a joke. It's like, oh yeah, cool, very cool, and like cool thing, or as a toy. It's like, oh yeah, that's a fun thing, right? You kind of like use it once, but of course I will never use this in production. So I remember like speaking with this huge, like one of the biggest like ad agencies in the world. I was like presenting to other executives, like, here's the future of like content, type anything you want. And like something like blurry came out, and like, cool, no, not for now. And they reached out like 3 weeks ago being like, hey, how many licenses can we get for this tomorrow?
Right.
Because the models are getting just so much better that it's obvious, like it's transforming their industries and a lot of other things. So I think what has changed for us is pretty much the speed. Like now we're entering a really nice moment where like things are converging and there's a good understanding of what's going to be possible and where things are going. Like scaling laws are getting to a good point. And so continue the same, but the thesis of the company was always built on that this will happen, and it's happening sooner rather than later.
Do you have a perspective on if this acceleration will continue, or if we just are seeing like a breakthrough and then we're going to need new breakthroughs to sort of get to the next level of quality?
Sure. I think there's definitely more compute that needs to be added to this, more data sets. I think we're still scratching the surface of like what will become. I think there's still like this, I was discussing this with a friend the other day, this idea of like there's like curiosity phase where people are like entering, the realm of like what's possible and coming up with all these solutions and ideas. But there's still a difference between those concepts and explorations and ideas and like meaningful products that are long-term built upon those. What I'm interested in seeing is like how much of those ideas will actually convert over time over meaningful products. And I think that conversion of products is not just pure research or pure new models. There needs to be like that layer of infrastructure to support those things. So it's great that you can run one single model to do one single thing on like X%. But if you're trying to do that at scale on a real-time basis for 10 people that then use it on a team and depend on it for their work, then there's like a slightly different thing. But I think we're about to see way more stuff around video specifically. I think image might be solved in a couple of more months, and video is starting to now catch up with that. So really exciting time for that.
What does something being solved mean to you? Like you could just get any image that you would ever want or imagine?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good question. I would say that I would consider being solved, being able to translate something like words or a description into like a meaningful image or content that pretty much matches what you're imagining. And if it doesn't, you're able to control really quickly and easily to get to the point where you can arrive at your final like idea, right? And so that's why the combination of models really makes sense. Like it's going to be hard to have a full model that does exactly what you want. For instance, for image generation, I think it's a combination of like you have a model that does the first milestone, which is like you generate something. There's no pixels. You generate the pixels. Second step is you're able to quickly modify it or in painting or grade it in some way and style it in some other way. But that whole thing just happens in like a few seconds or a few minutes, right? And if you speak with anyone in the industry, VFX or ad agencies or content creation, kind of like post-production companies, these are stuff these guys do all the time. This is like what they do for a living, right? They're able to create content out of nothing. The thing is just it's really expensive. It's really, really expensive, and it involves a lot of time and rendering and like skilled people to get to that point. I think for me, solve is like anyone can have access to that professional level grade VFX type of content from their computers and from a browser.
So do you ever think about making, more of like a version of Photoshop instead of like a video editing software? If you think like images are closer to being solved, I mean, certainly like I can't, go into Photoshop and get exactly the image I want. And, I love to play with, all the image generation tools out there, but, I do think like they're amazing at first, but then you kind of like hit this point where if like you really want the image to look like you want, it gets like kind of frustrating. I don't know. It seems like there's also room for like kind of like an image version of what you're doing. Is that something you'd consider doing, or why not make that?
Totally. Yeah. The answer is absolutely. I think a few things. One, I think we're converging more to this idea of like multimodal systems where you can transfer between images and videos and audio. I think the idea that we built software to deal with each media independently. So there's an audio editing software and a video editing software and an image editing software and a text-based like you have models that can quickly translate between all of those. And content, like let's say video, it's a combination of different things. You have images, you have videos, you have audio, you have voice, right? All of those things are now possible. And I think for us, when I think about the product philosophy of Runway, it's less about how do you build a better Photoshop or a better Premiere. Fundamentally, these models are just allowing you to do things that none of those softwares can do. So if you think about marginal integrations of those things, yeah, you build a better Photoshop that has a better like paintbrush or a better like context-aware tool. But ultimately, when you combine them in new ways, you create a new thing. It's completely new. It's not Photoshop. It's just like a new way of making videos and editing images and editing audio all in one single kind of like component or tool. And so for me, what's really interesting is like the multimodal aspect of things and translating also into those. And 3D, for instance, is one of the fields where you're going to start to see a lot of like translation between images and videos on 3D.
Totally. So I have to ask you your thoughts on like deep fakes and things like that. I'm sure everyone asks you that, but I'm really curious what you think about that. Do you think that you would want to like put in limitations into your software to, not allow certain things? Do you think this is about to change the way we view videos as this technology gets more standardized and available to everyone?
For sure. Yeah, I think as every major technological breakthrough, there's always like social concerns about how it might be misused or used in not the right or intended ways. And it's a good exercise to look at like history to see what has happened before. There's this really good like YouTube video about Photoshop when it was first released. I would think about like the early 90s. And they were like, it's a kind of like a late night show, and they're discussing like the ethical implications of manipulating images in magazines. And they're like, should we allow to manipulate images and put them in magazines? And it like half of the panel was like, no, we shouldn't. Just like it breaks the essence of what photography is, right? And like 20 years after that, it's like it makes no sense to think about not you doing something like that, right? And so there's always like an adaptation process, I would say, where people need to, and we need to collectively ask like, hey, how is it going to be used? But I think ultimately you understand what the limitations are, and you also fine tune your eyes and your understanding of the world to make sense of that thing, right? And now everyone knows that photoshopped is a verb that you can use to describe something that's manipulated, right? And you do that same exercise and you go back in time and you see the same. When film just started to appear, there was this interesting story about one of the first films that were made is like a train arriving to a station. And they were like projecting that on a room. And when people saw the train coming to a station, everyone ran away because like they thought the train was coming to a station, literally. So, but then you make sense of it and you're like, yeah, this is not true. Like, I understand that this is like an actual representation of something. And so ultimately, I think with AI and with generated content, we'll enter a similar phase where like it's going to become commonplace and something people are familiar with. And of course, there are going to be misuses and bad uses. Of course, people can use Photoshop for all sort of like evil ways, but like the 99% of like people are just like their lives have been changed forever in a positive way because of this.
Interesting. Well, look, I'd love to hear more about your tech stack. I mean, this is, a show for ML nerds of all types. Like, I mean, I think you're doing pretty hardcore ML at scale. Like, what have been the challenges of making this work? Like making the interface as responsive as it was. Like, what were the sort of the key things to scale up your models?
Sure, there's a lot of things that we've had to kind of like come up creatively to make this work in real time. On the one end, I guess on the ML side, we mostly use PyTorch for all models. We have a cluster, basically an AWS cluster that scales based on compute on demand, where we run all those models. For training, we use sometimes lighting and, of course, weights and biases to follow up and understand better what's working in on our model training. And then serving, we optimize for different like GPU kind of like levels or compute platforms, depending on availability. And so we've kind of like made some systems to scale up depending on demand. On the front end side of things, it's everything's TypeScript and React based. There's some WebGL kind of like acceleration stuff we're doing to make things like really smooth. And then the inference pipeline, where we're writing everything like C++ to make it like super, super efficient and like fast, specifically since you're decoding and encoding videos in real time. We also build this streaming system that passes frames or video frames through different models to do the things that I just showed you. And so we also have to come up really creative with that. And that's kind of like a big picture of, I guess, our tech stack.
I feel like one challenge that I'm seeing some of our customers run into as these models kind of get bigger and more important is that the actual kind of serving cost of the application increases. Is that like an issue for you? Like, do you do things like, quantization or like is lowering your inference costs like an important project for you all?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're running our biggest like cost right now is like AWS GPU costs and inference costs and serving these models. There are two main areas. Like for sure, like we have an HPC and we're doing like large scale training of language models and video models, and so that takes a lot of resources and time. But just serving on I would say like the trade-off between precision and like speed really matters. So quantizing model is great, but also you need to make sure that you're not affecting the quality of the model, because if you're affecting something on a pixel level, it might change the result from being like okay to like bad, and like that might mean that you're churning. And so if you're gonna like spend like a few more seconds rendering, that might actually be better. There's always like a trade-off, like how much. But yeah, we always try to figure out what's the right balance there. We're also exploring some stuff on the browser. I think the browser is becoming like really powerful. The only constraint about the browser is just memory and RAM, and like you get to like, it's a sandbox, so you can really do a lot of things specifically with video, but you can run some stuff on the browser. And so with WebAssembly specifically, you can convert some things and make them smooth enough, but I think we're not 100% there yet.
But you're also training your own large language models and large image models. I mean, that sounds like training would be a major cost for you as well.
Yeah, for sure. Retraining some stuff to make sure it works in the domain of what we have is kind of like one of our core competences. And so, yeah, now we're starting a huge job on our HPC, and so that's going to take a big percentage of our costs for the next few months.
I guess I have to ask, that language interface that you showed me was so compelling and cool, but I have been seeing language interfaces for the past 20 years. And like the challenge with these language interfaces is like, when they don't work, they're just like enraging. Like, and actually you sort of address that, like showing how it, creates these things and like you can undo them and you can kind of modify them. But I guess, do you feel like that kind of conversational interface is at the point where for you, it's an interface that you really want to use?
Yeah. I like to think of it as a tool, right? So it's not the sole answer to everything you need. Like this is not going to be a replacement for all of the workflows in making content, video, images, or sound, or whatever it is. It's just a speed up in the way you can do those kind of things. And so I think the sweet spot is a combination of both. Being able to have that constant feedback loop with the system where you're like stating something out, the system is like reacting in some way that matches your idea, and then you have that level of control to either like go in the direction you want and do what you want, or if you want to go, if it's not working, just do it yourself, right? I think a big mistake of like research, specifically in the area of like computational creativity, is this idea you can automate it entirely. So you see like one-click off solutions to do X, Y, or Z. And I think that's missed the bigger picture of like how most of creative work should actually work. Or that probably means that you've never actually worked with an agency where the client was asking you to like change things every single hour or make it bigger, make it smaller, right?
Right.
And so it's hard for me to imagine a world where like you have a one-click off solution for everything. That feels boring, to be honest. You want to have that control. And so I think language interfaces are a huge step towards like accelerating the speed at which you can execute. Are they the final answer for everything? I'm not sure, but they do make you just move faster on your ideas.
And did I understand you right that you want to build your own large language model? Like I would assume you would take one of the like many off the shelf language models today. Like what are you actually training your own?
Yeah, I think we are, but it's also like the fact that like ML, I guess the infra for models and models themselves are becoming commodities. It's great for companies like us because some stuff we can need to build on our own. Like there's a lot of things in Runway that you won't find anywhere else, but some other stuff like large language models that you can just use off the shelf. You have all these like companies offering similar services, and it's a great, I guess, as a consumer of those, if we want to use those, it's just a cost situation where like whoever offers like the best model we'll use, and to a point where like it might make sense to either like do it our own. So yeah, sometimes we don't have to do everything ourselves. You can just buy it off the shelf, but some other types you just need to do it because it doesn't exist.
And sorry, in large language models, you think you might do it yourself even?
We're doing a combination of both. We're like using APIs, but also returning some of our own.
I see. And do you feel like have you experimented with all the large models out there? Like, do you have like a favorite of the existing offerings?
I think GPT-3 works. I think actually the model that I think it's DaVinci. It's probably like GPT-4 by now. I think OpenAI has been updating that.
Right.
Silently behind the scenes, it works really well. And so that's the one I'd say we experimented the most and we get the best results.
Oh, cool. Well, look, we always end with 2 questions. I want to make sure I get them in. And so the second to last question is, what is like a topic that you don't get to work on that you wish you had more time to work on, or what's something that's sort of underrated for you in machine learning right now? And I realize it's a funny question to ask an obsessed ML founder, but I'll ask it anyway.
I think audio generation, I think it's catching up now, but it's not, no one really has been paying a lot of attention. There's some really interesting open source models from like Tacotron to a few other things out there. I think that's going to be really, really like transformative for a bunch of like applications. And we're already kind of like stepping into some stuff there. But I mean, it's hard to focus as an industry or as a research community in like a lot of things at the same time. And now that I guess image understanding has kind of like been solved in a way, like people are moving to other specific fields. I think one of the ones that we're going to start seeing very soon is audio generation. So yeah, excited for that for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do you have like a favorite model out there? Or we just recently talked to, I think, Dance Diffusion or Harmon AI that was doing some cool audio generation stuff.
Yeah, there's one. Let me search for it. That like just blew my mind. Tortoise TTS. I don't know if you've seen that one.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, Tortoise TTS is I think the work of just one single folk, James Bedker. It works really well, and he's been using it. Someone used it to create this Lex Fridman version, like generative podcast, and so I'll share with you the audio, but it's a whole like podcast series that goes every week, but everything's generated. The script is generated by GPT-3, and the audio is generated by Tortoise, and you can hear it's a podcast. It's just like you can't really tell.
That's amazing.
So yeah, really excited for stuff like that.
Cool. And I guess the final question is, for you, what's been the hardest part about getting the actual ML to work in the real world? So going from, these ideas of models or research to like deployed and working for users?
I think these models and things like image generation and video generation require a different mental model of how you can leverage this in creative ways. And I think a big mistake has been to try to use existing principles of image or video generation and patch them with this stuff. I think ultimately you need to think about it in like very different ways. Like navigating a latent space is not the same as like editing an image, right? So what are the metaphors and the abstractions they need to have? And we've come up with those before, like in the software paradigm that we have right now. You have like a brush and a paint bucket and a context-aware tool, and you're like editing stuff. But when you have large language models that are able to translate ideas into content, and you navigate and move across a specific space or vector direction in ways you want, they need new metaphors, they need new abstractions. So what's been really, I would say, interesting and challenging is what are those metaphors? What are those interfaces? How do you make sure the systems you're building are really expressive? I think 2 things that drive a lot of what we do are control and expressiveness. Control as in you as a creator want to have full control over what you're making, and that's really important. And how do you make that so you also are expressive about it? You can move in specific ways as you are intended to, or you're intending to do. So yeah, I think that's also, I guess, also it's really exciting and passionate for us to invent some of those stuff.
Well, it's really impressive what you're doing. Thanks so much for the interview.
Of course, thank you so much for hosting me.
If you're enjoying these interviews and you want to learn more, please click on the link to the show notes in the description, where you can find links to all the papers that are mentioned, supplemental material, and a transcription that we work really hard to produce. So check it out.